Well, hello, and welcome to Math Blossoms We're Growing and Mathematics is Natural. I'm your teacher, Miss G, and for today's topic, we're going to learn how to turn fractions into decimals and decimals back into fractions. Let's get started. All right, so for the first part, we're going to turn fractions into decimals. So the way you do that is you divide the numerator or the top number of your fraction by the denominator or the bottom number of your fraction. So for this first example here, we have 1/2 divided by, 1/2 is turned into a fraction by dividing the 1 by the 2. Okay, so 1 divided by 2 is 0.5, and that is the decimal version of 1/2. So basically, you're going to take the top number and just divide it by the bottom. You can use your Desmos calculator for that, unless you know how to do that mentally, or you can use long division, doing it by hand if you prefer to do it that way. For the fraction 7/9, you would divide 7 by the 9. Now, in this case, it keeps repeating. It keeps repeating. So that would be a repeating decimal, which we indicate with a repeating bar. Okay, so basically, it's pretty simple when you're turning a fraction into a decimal. You're just taking that fraction, dividing the top number by the bottom number, or the numerator by the denominator, and you're getting your decimal answer. Be aware of numbers like this. So let's talk about something like 3 and 1/2. This is a mixed number, right? So if I were to turn that into decimal form, and I know that 1/2, right here, we already found that. 1 divided by 2 is 0.5, right? So if this is 0.5, this part, and where does the 3 go, right? Well, the whole number always goes in the ones position. So when you're turning this into a fraction, the 3 is going to go to the left of the decimal in the ones place, because what you really have there is 3 ones, right? And then the 0.5 is going to be to the right of the decimal. And since 0 has a 3 in the spot already, then you're really just writing the 0.5 part down, right? So be aware of mixed numbers as well, and don't get confused by them. Just take that whole number, place it to the left of the decimal, and then all the digits to the right of the decimal that you find out by your division, you're just going to write it to the right of the decimal. Okay. Now let's go the other way around. How do I turn a terminating decimal back into a fraction? This is where place value comes into play, because you basically put the same number of digits in zeros next to a 1 in your denominator based on the place value of where that decimal ends, right? So terminating decimals are decimals that end. So if I had the decimal 0.7, for instance, so let's start with this one here, 0.7. Let me change colors so this will show up a little bit. If I were to write it here in my decimal place value chart, the 0 would be in the ones position, the dot or the point is here, and then, or the decimal, and then the tens place is where the 7 goes, right? So since the 7 ends that decimal in the tenths place, placing the 7 over a 10 is how you would turn it into a fraction. Okay. Now let's try turning 0.76 into a fraction. Well, if I wrote it on my place value chart, the 0.76 ends in the hundredths place. So I'm going to place a 100 in the denominator of my fraction under that 76. Now, this is not simplified though. So remember, if you can find a common factor to divide into both your numerator and your denominator, you should always simplify your fraction, always get it as small as possible. And we can divide 2 into 76 and to 100. So 76 divided by 2 is 38. 100 divided by 2 is 50. Now, how did I figure that out so fast? Well, I know that if a number ends in an even number digit, like 76, 6 is an even number. So is 0. 0, 2, 4, 6, 8, that kind of thing. So if they both end in even numbers, I know that I can keep dividing by 2 until I get it fully simplified. And yes, 8 is even and so is 0. So I can take my 38, divide it by 2 and get a 19. And I can take this 50 here and divide it by 2 and get a 25. So this is the simplest version of the 76/100ths fraction. Now for 0.765, we have 3 digits going. So let's add that third digit here. That ended in the thousandths place, which means we're going to place 1,000 in our denominator and then simplify that. Well, this time I don't have even numbered digits as my final digits, but I do have a 0 and a 5, which means I can divide 5 into both of those numbers evenly. So 765 divided by 5 is 153. And 1,000 divided by 5 is 200. And now that's the simplest way I can reduce that fraction to represent the 0.765 decimal. Okay, so use your place value if it's a terminating decimal. If it's one digit that is to the right of the decimal, you're going to use 10 in your denominator, right? If there's 2 digits to the right of that decimal, you're going to use 2 digits in your 2 zeros in your denominator next to that 1. Notice there's 3 digits here. I used 3 zeros in my denominator. And just don't forget to simplify by dividing by common factors, and you will be fine. Now, this is different though. Now we're talking about repeating decimals. How do we turn repeating decimals into fractions? Well, to turn a repeating decimal into a fraction, you don't use 10, 100, 1,000. You're going to use nines. So if there's one digit repeating, let's say I had the decimal 0.7 repeating, okay? There's one digit repeating, it's just a 7. So since there's only one digit repeating, I'm only going to place it over 1 9. And 7/9 is equivalent to 0.7 repeating. Now for 18, there's 2 digits repeating here, 0.18 repeating. So I'm going to place those 2 digits over 2 nines. So however many digits are repeating, that's how many nines you're going to use, right? This one I have 3 digits repeating. 1, 2, 3 is repeating. So I'm going to place that number over 3 nines this time. And then the final example here has 4 digits that are repeating, 8765. So we're going to take that and put it in our numerator and then place it over 4 nines. And they have simplified these fractions for you guys as well. So when you're turning a regular terminating decimal into a fraction, you're going to use 10, 100, 1,000, depending on where that decimal ends. But when you're turning repeating decimals into fractions, you're going to use either a 9, a 99, a 999, and so forth, depending on how many decimals are repeating. All right, so great job. But before I review, I want to show you one more thing, and that is on the Desmos calculator. So we're going to go back here, and I want to show you guys something about Desmos. I have placed the fraction 5/9 into Desmos. And if you notice, 5/9 is a repeating decimal. We just talked about that. If you see the 9 in the denominator, you know that that is 0.5555 repeating. Well, notice what your calculator did. Desmos always rounds that last digit if it's a number 5 or more. Now, that does not mean that that is not a repeating decimal, okay? That just means your calculator cannot hold as many digits as a repeating 5 has, because repeating 5s go on for infinity. Your calculators can't go on for infinity, right? So your calculator is going to naturally round it at that very last space if it can, but that does not mean it's not a repeating 5. It is a repeating 5. They just rounded it, okay? If you had a number that's less than 5, for instance 4, notice they didn't round it. They just had the 4s go all the way to the end, because when you round a 4, you don't round up, you just leave it, right? You only round up if it's a number 5 or greater. So if I were to put 7/9 here, you will see that they round that up to the 8 there, okay? the very last digit. So I don't want you guys to put that in your calculator and get confused thinking it's not a repeating decimal. It is a repeating decimal. It's just that last digit. Desmos likes to round it if it's if it can be rounded, because it can't hold all those digits, right? All right, so let's review what we did. We already did that one. So great job. And we're going to remember on this lesson to turn fractions into decimals by dividing the numerator by the denominator. The top number is divided by the bottom number, and then using the place value of the last number to determine whether to use a 10, 100, 1000, etc. when terminating decimals. That's hard to say. When terminating decimals, or decimals that end into fractions, and use nines for turning simple repeating decimals into fractions, such as 9, 99, 999, etc. in your denominators. And always simplify your fractions. And here's the reason why I'm asking everyone to do this, is because when you're taking these important exams, let's say you had a question where they're asking you to find the answers and the answers are in their multiple choice. Sometimes if you forget to simplify your fraction, your answer may not look like it's there. But if you simplify your fractions or reduce them to the smallest fraction you can get it, then oftentimes that is the answer that's in your multiple choice. So I'm just giving y'all a heads up on that, so you don't think, oh, I may have gotten the wrong answer. You may have gotten the right answer. You just may have forgotten to simplify it. So always simplify your fractions when you're taking assessments and everything. So thank you for watching the video, and hopefully you learned something today about converting fractions to decimals, decimals to fractions. And don't forget, you can always ask your teacher if you need additional assistance with this, and you can always use a calculator to double check your work and make sure you're doing it correctly. So we'll see you next time.